imagination. CorelDRAW, the ideal illustration program for novices or professionals.
Hello. Thank you for purchasing CorelDRAW. My name is Pat Byrne. I'm the Director of Engineering at Corel, and I'd like to give you some hints and tips today on how to use CorelDRAW and some of the things that it can do for you. Before we go any further, though, I'd like to ask you to fill out the registration card that comes with the software and send it in. With this information, we can keep you in contact with any changes or enhancements that we might have with the product, and we can also let you know of any new products that Corel will be coming out with in the future. CorelDRAW is a different kind of artistic package. It's used on an IBM PC or any one of the clones that can work with Microsoft DOS and Microsoft Windows. The way that it works, though, is a little bit different than most graphics packages. It's intended for use by artists and illustrators, or people who need to be involved with the fine detail of artistic content. Its strengths are artistic elements like the fine control over text, the fine control over the pen widths and colors that are used in composing artistic compositions. It doesn't have to be used only for art, though. Because it's a computer program, it retains a lot of the benefits of a computer program. For instance, a friend of mine is in the quilting business, and what she likes to do is experiment using CorelDRAW, placing various colored swatches in various orientations and making 50 copies and patching them all together. And with CorelDRAW, she's able to get a fair idea of how the quilt's all going to come together. It can also be used for preparing corporate logos, business graphics, headlines for newspapers, and lots of other things. When we designed CorelDRAW, we put a good deal of emphasis on the way that you use the program. We've structured the tools, the organization of the tools, and the presentation on the screen so that the elements of the design are grouped together. As we go through the tutorial for the next hour or so, you'll see that various aspects of the way the program works are clustered together in ways that we feel make sense, and we hope that you feel they make sense too. The terms that we use, some of the terms are artistic terms. As a rule, though, most of the terms we use should be familiar to you in day-to-day life, even if you're not an artist. You'll see that the ability to bring in artwork from other pieces of software and to use text will allow those of us who are not artists to still use this program in a productive way. To use CorelDRAW, you need an IBM PC or one of the clones with 640 kilobytes of memory. You do need a hard disk. You don't need a floating point processor. The hard disk should have about 2.5 megabytes of space available on it. Not all of that is for the program. Some of that is used by the program as it's working. In addition, you need either a mouse or a graphics tablet. You should have a high-res screen, either an EGA or an EGA or a VGA, or a Hercules, or better. Perhaps one of the high-res black and white screens would do quite well. Now, because it's a computer program, we have to determine how to get information into the computer and back out again. The most common technique we use for getting information into the computer is to use the keyboard and the mouse. Now, personally, I don't use a mouse. I tend to prefer using the graphics tablet, which is simply a mouse replacement. Another tool that we can use to bring graphics into the program is an optical scanner. These are available from many manufacturers, such as Hewlett-Packard. Now, to get the information back out of the program, the most common technique is to print it. CorelDRAW can support PostScript, LaserJet, and PaintJet printers directly. In addition to this, we can ask CorelDRAW to produce files. These are clumps of information stored on the disk, which you can then use in other graphics packages like PageMaker and Ventura to compose more complex pages involving a large amount of text. In addition to the hardware that you need to run the computer, the mouse and the computer and the screen, you should have a basic knowledge of the way that the computer works, the way DOS works. you need to know how to name files and what subdirectories are. If you're having any trouble with those concepts, I'd like to recommend the following book. It's called Running MS-DOS by Van Wolverton. It's published by Microsoft Press, and if you have any concerns about the way that the computer works and what it can do and how information is organized, this is a good starting book. For those of you who are perhaps a little more technically oriented, there's another couple of books that we have here in our library. There's the IBM PC-DOS Handbook, published by Cybex, and the Peter Norton DOS Guide, published by Brady. Besides DOS, you should also have Microsoft Windows. This is an enhancement to DOS which allows you to use the mouse and the graphics screen. CorelDRAW runs using Microsoft Windows, so do several other programs. I would recommend that you install Microsoft Windows on your computer and get it running. Become familiar with some of the basic programs that are included with it, and run some check prints to make sure that you can print directly from Microsoft Windows. If you're having any troubles in that area, I'd like to recommend the Microsoft Windows User's Guide. Now, this comes right in the Microsoft Windows package, although, as you and I both know, people don't often read the manuals that come with their software. In this case, if you're having any troubles, look in here. The answer is in here. CorelDRAW is fairly easy to use. The artistic elements which we can include in an artistic composition are 5. We have rectangles and their brothers, or rounded rectangles, circles and ellipses, freehand art, which is just about anything that you can sketch, text, and bitmaps. Bitmaps are photographic type elements which can be brought in from a scanner or from some other software package. Using the mouse and the keyboard, you can create and place all of these elements on your canvas, and after they're placed and positioned, you can color them. Now, each element in CorelDRAW has 3 coloring properties. It has an interior color, which is used to fill the object. It has a peripheral color, a stroke, or a pen color, which is used to outline the object. You can turn that outline on or off as you choose. And the outline also has a width, and that width may not necessarily be constant. It can be rounded or pointed or even calligraphic. Using the 5 drawing elements and the 3 ways of coloring it, you can compose a wide variety of artistic elements. Let me show you what the screen looks like, and where these elements are on the screen, and how you control them. This is the screen that's presented to you when you first turn on CorelDRAW. This is what we call a welcome screen. By clicking on OK, we proceed to the working screen of CorelDRAW. You're presented with a list of words horizontally across the top, and what we call a toolbox vertically down the left. Some of the other controls are properties of Microsoft Windows. Specifically, this box can be used to shut the program down by clicking on the Close option. These arrows allow you to shrink CorelDRAW to a minimum size, and if you double-click on that, you can restore it. The up arrow brings CorelDRAW to the full screen, and this is the version, this is the method of viewing that I personally prefer to use the most. The rectangle shown here with this drop shadow represents the printed page. What's shown here is a landscape 8.5 by 11. In other words, an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper turned sideways. And here is what it looks like straight up and down. Now let me run over the toolbox. The first tool is called the Pick tool. It is used for placing and moving objects. The second tool is called the Node Edit tool. It's used for changing the interior shapes of objects. Next is the Magnify tool. It's used to change the view of the artwork that you're working with. The next is a drawing tool. This is used to create freehand artwork. The rectangle is used to create rectangles, and the ellipse tool to create ellipses. The text tool allows you to place text anywhere on the page that you'd like. The second last tool is used to control the color and shape of the outline. The last tool is used to control the color of the interior of the objects. If I may use an analogy, the first two tools allow you to change the shape and the placement of any objects on the page. These can be thought of as verbs. These middle four tools allow you to create four different types of graphic elements, and these, once they're created, can be thought of as nouns. The last two allow you to change the color and shape that is applied to the artistic elements, and these can be thought of as perhaps adjectives. Bearing this analogy in mind will help a lot as we proceed through the description of the tools. In addition to the tools which are presented on the left-hand side, and these are all selected by clicking the mouse, there's a series of tools also presented across the top of the page. These are keyed using English words because some of them involve far more complex concepts that can be illustrated with a simple pictograph. These can be selected by either clicking on them with the mouse or through keyboard shortcuts that are described in the Microsoft Windows guide. Among the selections, I'm just going to walk through the selections now so that you can see them and be familiar with them, and I'll refer to them later. Under the File pull-down, we can start a new file, open an existing file, save this file, or save it under a new name. We can import graphic elements and send out, export graphic elements. The artwork may be printed, and we have complete control over the setup of the page. And here is where you would choose to finish working with CorelDRAW and exit to some other application. Under the Edit pull-down, you have the ability to undo or redo any action, any of the verbs. You also have the ability to repeat anything that you may have done. Things can be cleared or deleted and duplicated. You may copy the artistic attributes, the colors, from one element to another. You can edit the text that you have placed on your page, and you can select everything that is on the page. In a little while, when we get into moving things, you can either move them with the mouse, or you can use these two menu pull-downs to manually select the kind of transformation which you wish to apply to the object, magnifying it by a factor of 2.0 exactly, for instance. You also have the ability to reset any artistic element back to its original shape. Under the Arrange menu, we have the ability to control the order in which objects are placed, any logical grouping which may be required to keep elements together. We can combine elements to create objects which may appear to have holes in them, and we can convert text into curves if that is what you need to do. The graphic elements can also be aligned to each other or to any arbitrary point. Under the Display pull-down, we have control over the grid. The grid is an invisible screen which you can lock objects to. And you can make rulers visible. You can show the status line, and you have control over the preview screen. You can hide or make visible bitmaps. And under the Special pull-down, you have control over macro creation and some preferences. So that's a short introduction to the tools that are available on the screen while you are working with CorelDRAW. I think that's enough generalities. Now let's create some real objects on the screen using the drawing tools. There are 5 object types usable in CorelDRAW. 4 of them can be selected directly from the toolbox using this group of tools. Rectangles are created by selecting the Rectangle tool, depressing the mouse button where you wish one corner to lie, dragging the mouse while keeping the button down, releasing the mouse button, and the rectangle is created. That's all there is to it. While creating these objects, you may modify the way in which you create them using the keys on the keyboard. The control key. We have selected the control key to have to modify the creation of objects in the sense that it constrains the creation of the object. And what we mean in this case is if you depress the control key before you start the rectangle and keep it depressed for the entire time that you create the rectangle, then we will lock it to being a perfect square. It's as simple as that. If the grid is turned on, this is a special locking grid which you have control over. If the grid is enabled, then as you create the rectangle, it will lock on grid. For instance, if you have selected a half-inch grid, then all four corners of your rectangle will end up on half-inch borders. So you'll only be able to create, the smallest rectangle you'd be able to create would be a half-inch by half-inch square. The second easy to explain tool is the ellipse tool. To create an ellipse, you simply click on the ellipse selection in the toolbox, depress the mouse button in one corner of the box surrounding an ellipse, drag the mouse, let go of the mouse button, and you have an ellipse. The control key similarly constrains you to drawing only circles. No matter how I move the mouse and drag it, all I get is circles of varying size. Similarly, if the grid is on, the circle will be locked in, or the circle or the ellipse will be locked into an even number of multiples of the grid size. Now, let's look at freehand art. What I'm going to do, just for the sake of clarity, is delete those elements on the screen, and we'll look at freehand. To draw freehand, there are two kinds of drawing that you can do while you're drawing freehand. The simplest is to move the mouse where you wish to start a line, depress the mouse button, drag the mouse, and then release the mouse button. The computer will analyze where you've moved and change those movements into smooth curves. If you don't want smooth curves, if you want straight lines, simply click the mouse button temporarily where you wish the line to start, move to a destination, and click again. So it's mouse down and drag to draw smooth curves, mouse down and up, move, down and up again to draw a straight line. Now the computer always keeps track of the last thing you did. So if you wish to continue where you left off, you can go to either end of the most recent object and start another drawing. So for instance, as I move from one place to another, the computer will automatically join those together. Notice this triangle which I have drawn does not touch this side-winding S shape, nor does it touch this S with the vertical stroke. I have on this page 3 separate graphics elements. Let's go over the creation of straight lines again. I'll delete what's on the screen, and we'll look at some straight lines. If I click to start a line and move the mouse, I'm leaving behind the trail of a line. If I click at any point now, I will drop the straight line. By pushing the Control key, I lock the creation of straight lines to 15-degree steps. Here, the flickering line that you see is locked to 0 degrees. And as long as I stay within a few degrees of horizontal, it will be locked to a straight horizontal line. If I swing down, the line steps in 15-degree steps, so it's very easy to get a straight vertical. It's very easy to eyeball that. Also, if you want a 45-degree step, you just count 1, 2, 3 steps, and we're at 45 degrees. The second mouse button draws the line. The entire time, I had the Control key down, which locked me to the 15-degree steps. If the grid was on, both the beginning and the end of line would have been locked onto the grid settings. So for instance, if I had a half-inch grid, this would be on half-inch steps, and this would be on half-inch steps as well. As I said, the computer always keeps track of the last thing drawn. If you begin a curve or end a curve near either end of the previous drawing, the computer will automatically join them together, as it did there. If you are drawing a straight line, as the computer gets close to the end, you'll see the line snap onto the ending. The computer is assuming that if you're close enough, you really intended for the line to be fully closed. This snapping effect only happens with straight lines. Of course, it doesn't happen with curves. You can probably see this snapping occurring now. If I didn't terminate and tried to do that with a smooth curve, of course, there's no snapping possible because I'm drawing the whole time. Still, if I finish the line close enough to the end, the computer will automatically close the curve. So there are two automatic functions. One, if you have an existing element and you start a second element at the end of the first, it will automatically join them. Further, not only will it join, but it will also automatically finish a curve for you. And that's about it for freehand. Now let's look at the properties of text and how you place text on a page. Simply select the text generation tool. Notice that the mouse cursor on the screen has changed to a different shape. We'll drop that cursor where we wish the text to begin. At this point, all we have to do is fill in the blanks in this box that appears on the screen. The biggest blank is this large elongated rectangle at the top of the screen. This is where you type in the text which you wish to appear in the final artwork. This box can support multiple lines of text, and you get to your second line simply by pushing the Enter key on the keyboard. At any time, you can use the mouse to move your position inside this box, or the up and down arrows that are supplied on the keyboard. If you have more than 3 lines, you can use these scroll bars on the right-hand side to move down through the text or up through the text. Once you have completed the entry of the actual letters that you wish to appear in the artwork, you then select left, centered, or right justified. What this means is the text will begin where you left your mouse down and be flush left against it. This means it will be centered around the point, and this means it will be flush right against it. If we choose the center option, that's probably the best for demonstration purposes. The font selection box lists some 25 font names. These names are probably new to most of you. These are synthetic names which we have chosen to represent the fonts. The actual fonts which are used in the program are very close to the fonts which are available in the PostScript printers. An example of one letter from each of the fonts shows up in this square box in the lower right-hand corner of the dialog box. In addition to selecting the font name, you also have control over the normal, the bold, the italic version, and the bold italic version. You then would typically select the point size which you wish to use to lay the text down. You can use these up and down arrows, or you can go directly in to the box and type any text you wish, any number you wish to select the point size. When the font is loaded, the CorelDRAW is smart enough to know the default line spacing and the default letter spacing. You can override these numbers by clicking on this button and bringing up a secondary menu which allows you to control the interword, intercharacter, and interline spacing. These are specified in terms of ems or as a percentage of the point size. The text is then displayed on the screen. Notice how it is centered. I clicked roughly here. Notice how the text is centered left and right of this point, and the second line descends from this point. Notice also, because of the rather large point size I selected, the text is slopped off the edge of the page. If I printed this page now, the letters E and A would probably not make it out to the printer. Going back for just a minute to the text dialog box, if you wish to enter any symbols that are not in the normal Roman alphabet or the Roman numbers, you can get extra characters, bilingual characters, copyright symbol, and things like this, by pushing the Alt-0 keys. Simply click the cursor anywhere inside the text dialog box. I'll put it here between the word text and line. Depress the Alt button on the keyboard, and then press a 0 on the numeric keypad, and then a 3-digit sequence as specified in Appendix B in the reference manual. Release the Alt key, and the character will be inserted. Quite often, a lot of the typographic symbols which we provide do not become visible in this text dialog box. They only become visible when we go out to the screen. And you'll see I've put a trademark symbol here in between the words. Going back to the text dialog box, when you have a cursor in the midst of some text, you can use the backspace key to delete to the left of where your cursor is flashing, or the delete key, which is usually on the lower right-hand side of your keyboard, to delete to the right of where the cursor is flashing. In an extreme, you can sweep your cursor across a group of letters, highlighting them in black, and then press the delete key, which will delete everything that you had swept across. If you have a piece of text that is already existing on the screen, you can get back to that text for further editing using the Edit Text pull-down. If you do not do this, the simple act of pressing the cursor again anywhere on the screen assumes that you wish to create new text. Notice that when I come to create a new string of text, it assumes the same font justification and point size. I'll run that down a little bit so we can distinguish between the first group of text I put up and the second group. These are the 4 drawing tools: freehand, rectangles, ellipses, and text. The pick tool is one of the most powerful elements of CorelDRAW. With it you can place and resize and shape any of the graphic elements which compose your drawing. The pick tool is the first tool in the toolbox. We placed it there because it is probably considered by most people the most powerful element of CorelDRAW. To illustrate its use, let me bring up 4 pieces of sample artwork. I'll just write the letter H here. In freehand, I'll also bring up a rectangle, an ellipse, and a little bit of text. Select the pick tool. Whatever we were working on last will be selected. If I wish to select something else, I simply click on the wire frame that describes the object. Take the mouse to it, push the mouse button down and release the mouse button, and the program will highlight the object you've selected in 2 ways. One of the ways is that the interior points are shown as tiny little blocks. You see these little nubs all the way along the artwork. In addition, a series of 8 fairly moderately sized squares outline the perimeter of the object, what we call a bounding box. This is the extent of the object. Nothing in that artwork will extend outside of these 8 black boxes. Freehand art always has several nubs inside it, several of these nodes. Rectangles have little nodes shown on the corners. I don't know if they come out in the video, but they're there. Ellipses have one node, and text has one node per letter. Okay, I don't know if you can see between, let me just blow it up a bit. You should be able to see. Between the T, the E, the X, and the T, there's little tiny squares. To select any object, as I said, simply click on any of the wire frame. CorelDRAW differs from many other programs in that we never click inside the object. Clicking inside a rectangle does nothing. Inside the ellipse does nothing. You have to be on the wire. There are several ways to select objects. As I said, you can simply click on it. Another way is to draw a box around it. Move your mouse to a position outside of the object, push the mouse button down, drag the mouse, and notice that we're drawing a dotted line which surrounds the object. Let go of the mouse button, and everything that is totally contained within that box will be selected. Notice that even though some of the box went across the ellipse, since the ellipse is not totally within it, it did not get selected. If I had drawn the selection box like this, then both elements are totally selected, totally enclosed, and both will be selected. Now, as an aid to indicate which elements are selected, they have their little nodes lit up. Notice now that the 8 large squares surround the sum of the two. In other words, they define the outer limits of all of the elements that are selected. To give you an example, drawing a box like this surrounds the rectangle, the ellipse, and the text, but not the letter H. And by watching out for these little squares that show up on the graphic elements, you can distinguish between what is selected and what isn't. Another way to select things is to, if you wish to select more than one thing, select one, push the Shift button down on the keyboard, and then click on another. And that will add it to the list. I have selected the rectangle and the ellipse. Now I can select the text by also clicking on it. And each time I click on something with the Shift key down, I add it to the list. And notice, every time I add a new element that's outside this total bounding box, the squares jump out to the new limits. If you continue holding the Shift key, you can actually unselect objects. Every time you click, it alternates on or off. For instance, now I will unselect the word text. That means there are only 3 things left selected: the H, the rectangle, and the ellipse. The text is not selected. There's a 4th way to select things, and it's rather brute force. Under the Edit pull-down, the last option says Select All, and that will select everything on your page. Now, what good is selecting? Well, the most important thing you can do with selecting is to move an element. Now I'm showing you the screen here with nothing selected. I'll move the mouse to one of the graphic elements, push the mouse button down, and release it. The element is selected. If I then grab the wire anywhere inside on the object perimeter, again, on the object perimeter, push the mouse button down, move the mouse, and release it, I move the object. Let me show you again. Push the mouse button down and release it to select the graphic element. Push the mouse button down again and drag, and you'll move the element. Notice that you don't actually see the element while it's moving, you just see the rectangle which represents the bounds of the element moving. Releasing the mouse button moves the element. There's a shortcut for this. You don't actually have to click twice. If I wish to grab this letter H, I can simply push the mouse button down, drag it, and release, and the object will move. I'll just put it back and move the text down again. So we have our 4 objects on the screen. So if you grab any one of the corners, push the mouse button down, move the mouse, and release the mouse, you'll enlarge the object. Whichever corner you grab allows you to stretch in that direction. The diagonally opposite corner stays fixed. See, the upper right-hand corner of the T stayed where it was, the lower left-hand corner enlarged. This applies to both enlarging and shrinking. Notice that when you grab one of the corners, both the height and width increase together, so that the letters, if we're dealing with text, the letters retain their shape. If you grab one of the sides, or the top or bottom controls, put the mouse down, and move it, this allows you to stretch the graphics element. Now in the case of text, this can be a little disastrous, as you'll see here. The text loses a little bit of its legibility. In the case of more artistic elements, it's quite often a realistic thing to do. Here I would stretch it taller. Here I would stretch it wider or thinner. Here I'll make it smaller. And now I'll move it. Notice that moving takes place by grabbing the interior wires. Stretching always takes place by grabbing the squares, the 8 squares which define the perimeter of the box. So we can move, we can magnify or reduce, and we can stretch. There are a second set of transformations which you can activate by simply clicking on the object again. Don't move it, just click the mouse button temporarily. Notice that the 8 handles change to new shapes. In the corners are round type arrows, suggesting rotation. Along the sides are straight arrows, implying some sort of sliding effect. And that's exactly what happens. If you grab a corner, push the mouse button down, move your mouse, let go of your mouse, you'll find that the object is rotated. It's probably not as easy to see with something like the letter H, but let me show you it with the text. One click to select, a second click to bring up the secondary tools, rotation tools. Grab the corner, move it, let go of the corner, and you've got rotated text. The tools which are on the sides of the object allow you to skew it. For instance, if I'll go over the top of the top center icon or marker, push the mouse down, slide it, see the skewing effect that happens to the rectangle. And when I let go, the contents are shifted in the same way. I'll restore that by shifting back approximately the same amount. Notice in the middle of the object, it might not be that easy to see in the case of text, but I'll show you on the rectangle. Once to select, a second time to get the secondary tools. See the bullseye in the middle? This point is in fact movable and defines the center of rotation. It always starts off in the middle of the object. But if you push your mouse button down and grab it, you can pull it outside. It is the center of rotation, so as I spin now, notice that the spin takes place around the center that I had specified. If I move it over here, then the rotation takes place around the other side. It may not make much sense to rotate an ellipse, but if I make it highly eccentric like this, then rotation becomes kind of valuable because you can get, for instance, the top of a tin can or the top of a coffee cup. So I'm going to run over the transformations again, this time with a little more detail. You can select multiple objects by dropping a marquee box around them. You can select multiple objects by holding the Shift key as you select them. Movement is simply a case of dragging any of the wires inside, and the composite of whatever you have selected moves altogether. They can be completely unrelated pieces, and they will move together as a unit. Here, the H and the text move. If you grab a sidebar or a top bar, you stretch the object, either taller or wider. If you grab a corner, you magnify without stretching. The object keeps its shape. Now comes the extra detail. If you move while holding down the Control key or the Constrain key, then your movements are locked to straight verticals and straight horizontals. Quite often when you're composing artwork and you just want to jog something to the left or right or up or down, and you don't want to lose the other orientation, just hold the Control key down and you find yourself locked to straight verticals and straight horizontals. Make sure that you let go of your mouse before your Control key, because the Control key is the thing that does the locking. If you let go of the Control key first, then the object will slip off of the straight vertical or straight horizontal. I'll push the control key again. You'll see me back on the straight horizontal. And I let go of the mouse first. The movement takes place on a straight horizontal move. On the stretches, holding the control key locks you to an even-sized magnify. This object is so big, and when I stretch to the right, now it's exactly twice as big. And now it's exactly 3 times as big. This also applies swinging the other way. If I go back through the object and swing on the other side, I get exactly -1 times the object, or effectively turn the object inside out. Not inside out, left to right mirror. If I'm stretching an object, let me pick something smaller. For instance, the word text. If I'm magnifying the object, and if I hold the control key, I get a copy which is exactly twice as big, or 3 times as big, or -1, which allows you to turn the object upside down. This constrain aspect applies to both stretches and magnifies. I'm holding the constrain key now for those last 2 examples. During rotation, the constrain key locks me to 15-degree steps. Here we have no rotation. 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90. All you have to do is count the little steps as it goes, and you'll find yourself becoming quite comfortable with the constrain key. The same, of course, applies to the skew tool. The pick tool, which we've just covered, allows you to position and size any object. But if you've noticed, even though we've rotated and skewed them, we haven't changed the basic shape of any of the elements. The second placement tool, which I'd like to talk about, is the node edit tool, which will allow you to get right into the elements and change the interior. The node edit tool is the second tool in the toolbox. Node edit works differently on the 4 or the 5 different object types. On the screen I have 4 of the basic object types. To begin node edit, simply click down on the node edit tool. Then click anywhere on the object which you wish to edit. Rectangles are probably the easiest to edit. Let me just zoom in and show you this rectangle. Here we have a rectangle in node edit. Notice the 4 corners are lit up with open rectangles. If you wish to change a rectangle to a rounded rectangle, simply grab one of the corners and drag it in. All 4 corners change in harmony, in unison. If you have the grid on, the radius of the rounded corner will lock into the grid units. For instance, if you had a half-inch grid, this would step from a 0 radius, which is a square rectangle, to a half-inch radius or a 1-inch radius. If we go out and have a look at the whole page again, let's have a look at ellipses and circles. To node edit an ellipse or a circle, first click on it to select it. There is one small square that shows up, either at the center top or the center bottom of the ellipse. If you wish to turn this ellipse or circle into a partial, simply grab that point and drag it around. And you can create any partial circle or partial ellipse that you wish. If you move your mouse inside the circle, you also get 2 lines extended to the center to form a Pac-Man shape. If you move your cursor outside the ellipse, then you have simply the elliptic section. If you come within about 5 degrees of the end, in other words, if you drag the circle right around over top of itself, you can restore it back to a closed path. The constrain key locks your circle on 15-degree steps. So for instance, if I wish a 3/4 pi, I just hold the control key down while I'm editing the ellipse, and I can force the angles to be functions of 15 degrees. So that's circles and rectangles. Let's go look at the more complex objects. Text, for instance. Here's a word of text. If I node edit this, I'm presented with 6 edit handles. 4, one for each letter, along the baseline of the object, 1 in the lower left, and 1 in the lower right. Node edit on text allows you to position the letters of the text within the word. Now, you don't change the shape. For instance, the X stays an X. But by picking up the handle and moving it, I can position the X closer to the E. Now, this kerning is completely manual. You can pick up the X and place it wherever you want. The Corel fonts, as they're supplied with the program, with CorelDRAW, already have kerning information in them. This T and E are already placed in what the program thinks is an optimal position. But as you and I both know, when you're dealing with large headline text, there's always some human element that should be involved in placing the letters. And we give you that control. Simply pick up the handle of the character and place it wherever you'd like. Now, CorelDRAW gives you the freedom to move it both horizontally and vertically. If you're concerned about losing the vertical aspect of your word, simply hold the Control key and this will lock you to the baseline. Notice now that I can move the X, but it is stuck to the baseline. So I don't need to worry about a little vertical slippage. Same on the T. I'll pick up the T and see how it sticks to the baseline. So this locks me only to horizontal shifts and guarantees that the word stays on a constant baseline. You can get into a second set of controls by double-clicking on the handle of any letter. Double-clicking brings up another dialog box which gives you all sorts of control over the detail of that particular character. You can select a new font, a new point size, make it an automatic superscript or subscript, give it some horizontal shift, vertical shift, and even bend it on an angle, say 36 degrees. So you can see the X now is in a new font and bent. Double-clicking, I can restore that. Well, close enough. You can move multiple letters by simply dragging a marquee box around multiple handles. Notice now the X and the T move in concert because I selected the both of them. This multiple select can be done using the marquee technique or by holding the Shift key as you select the handles. You can even, for instance, select the E and the T, and notice only those two move. Under the Arrange pull-down, there are options for Align to Baseline and Straighten Text, which remove the exceptions from the string. In other words, they restore the original font and baseline and letter spacing of the text. A lot of fonts are optimized in their letter positions at certain point sizes, and you can usually get a good deal of reasonable kerning by moving them all together by a constant amount. The handle in the lower right-hand corner allows you to squeeze in a set of characters or pull them apart. And the letters are squeezed together or pulled apart in proportion to their size. In other words, the X will get moved more than the T because the X is wider than the T. If you hold the Control key while you're moving this handle, then you affect the inter-word spacing. To give you an example, I'll go back to the Pick tool and I'll just add a little bit of text to this string. I've added 2 more words and a second line. Of course, it's bigger, so I'll just zoom out a bit, move the text over to where I can have a look at it. Now, node edit on this text. As I said before, this handle allows you to stretch all of the letters apart by a common amount, or squeeze them together by a common amount. If you hold the Control key, you simply spread the inter-word spacing and the letters stay relatively in the same spaces. Notice the word text and the word on and the word line did not separate, only inside themselves, only between the words was separated. Again, the control key allows me to squeeze them back together again. The control in the lower left-hand corner gives you control over line spacing. Now remember, these controls are different from the pick tool. If we had the pick tool, for example, and stretched the lower central control, not only do you make the lines wider, but you also stretch the letters. And there's a difference between that and the node edit version, where we stretch the lines but keep the body shapes of the characters intact. Let me just shrink this a bit, put it back on the page. There we go. When you are performing node edit on a character, for instance, if I go in here and change the font or the size of this character or its position, that's fine. You cannot change the color or the stroking that is applied to this character separate from the rest. In other words, you cannot have blue letters followed by a red letter followed by more blue letters. They all stay the same color. You can change the size, its position, the font, and whether it's bold or italic, separate from the rest of the text. If you're in a situation where you do need to change the color, then you'll have to make this letter a separate artistic element and color it separately. The fourth type of graphic element upon which you can perform node edit is the freehand drawing. Now, because of the power involved in this tool, I'd like to start with a fresh screen, and I'll just draw a simple curvy line and discuss some of the things that you can do in node edit. I'll zoom in a bit so that we can talk about this sensibly. And change this to a straight line. All freehand art is composed of two kinds of elements: straight lines and Bezier curves. Bezier curves are not quarter circles or splines or anything that you're probably used to. This is a new kind of curve. It's used extensively in PostScript printers and is used in new types of computers for representing curves which happen in real life. Beziers are rounded type curves. Each Bezier has a starting point and an ending point. Notice the curve starts at the starting point and passes through the ending point. In addition to the curve itself, there are 2 points associated with the Bezier which do not lie on the curve itself. These points are off the curve. They're called control points. And these points control the angle at which the Bezier curve begins and the angle at which it ends. Notice that the Bezier curve begins its travel in a line along the line going to the control point. It then veers away from that, heading towards its destination, and it lands at its destination in a straight line coming from the control point. We refer to this as the launch angle and the landing angle. So remember that the launch and the landing go along the lines as if there was a dotted line to the control point. Notice at print time, though, these control points are invisible. They are not actually on the curve, and their only reason for existence is to bend the curve up or down or any way around. In Node Edit, if you wish to move a Bezier, simply put the mouse down over one of the squares that represents the endpoints and move it, letting go of the mouse to leave the curve where you wish it to lie. You can do this on either endpoint. You can also pick up the control points and move them around. And I'm just going to get rid of this straight line. There is our Bezier. Let me show you some of the things you can do with Beziers. You can get a quarter circle. You can get a half circle. You can get S shapes. And you can even get twisty types of shapes. This gives you an idea of the kinds of things you can do with the simple Bezier construct. Typically, though, in artwork, you deal with 90-degree sections or 45-degree sections, things that represent normal types of curves that you would use in artwork. Now, let me just split this in two to show you what happens when two Beziers meet. We have a Bezier on the left-hand side and a Bezier on the right-hand side. Both share this common point. The curve starts at this end, goes towards its control point, lands in the center along the line of this control point, leaves then carrying on to a second control point, and bends down to come in for a landing at the third point. So they share a common point in the middle. This common point is actually been marked as being smooth. Notice that as I spin the control point around and I modify the launch and landing angles, the one on the other side spins to match. This guarantees that when the curve is printed on the printer, the line will go through this node smoothly. And in fact, in the absence of this little dot, which is only here for editing purposes, we will have a smooth curve going right through there. And no matter how I distort it, the program, CorelDRAW, enforces the smoothness. See how it's still smooth now, even though it's quite a different shape, it still guarantees smoothness. Now let's get into the editing. In CorelDRAW, if you wish to move any point, put your mouse down, drag it, and let go of the mouse. And this applies to both nodes and controls. If you wish to move more than one at the same time, you use the multiple selection technique in the same way that we did with the pick tool. For instance, if you start in white space and drag a rectangle, you can select whatever you surround. Those 2 points are now selected. If I then move one of them, the other one moves with it. They move in as a group. Another way to select more than one node is to hold the Shift key. Here I'll select the extreme left-hand node, hold the Shift key, and select the extreme right-hand node. Now if I move one of them, they both move. The unselected ones stay still. Moving you can do directly with the mouse. Deleting you can also do directly with the mouse. If I select this point and touch the Delete key on the keyboard, the computer will remove that node from the curve. In addition to the normal move and delete functions, which can be performed directly using the mouse or the keyboard, there is a suite of 6 or 7 other things that you can do to a freehand curve. To get the selection menu for these other functions, simply delete whichever nodes you wish affected. Simply select whichever nodes you wish to be affected, and then double-click the mouse at those nodes. You'll be presented with this selection box with 10 options in it. At any point in time, only the options which are applicable to what you've selected show up. For instance, in this case, the first selection option is delete, and this has the same effect as the delete key. Let me undo that so we'll get the object back so we'll have something to play with. Again, I'll select this node. Add allows me to add another point in between the ones I had selected previously. Double-click again. Let's look at break. Break allows me to separate a curve. Breaks can only apply to the nodes. Join. Join will be activated if you select 2 points that are both endpoints. Joining glues them together and they become as one. Double-clicking again, let's look at another option, to-line. To-line will convert whatever was selected to a straight line. Notice now it is a straight line. It does not have Bezier properties. Since it's a straight line, the most you can do is move the 2 endpoints, one or the other sides. It stays straight. To curve is the complement, converts it back to a Bezier. The next 3, cusp, smooth, and symmetric. Cusp allows you to mark any point for bending. Notice now that the Bezier to the left-hand side of this straight line is free to be bent and twisted. If, on the other hand, I mark it as being smooth, it is no longer free to be twisted in any way. The control always lies along this line, which forces the locality around the node always to be smooth. Another thing you can do, only where two Beziers meet, is ask for symmetric. This is like double smooth. When something is double smooth, not only do the two Bezier controls seesaw around each other, as one gets larger, so does the other. Notice the lower one is moving down as the upper one moves up. This enforces a kind of double smoothness. Just to illustrate that, I will change this point by double-clicking, change this point back to smooth. And now, even though they seesaw around each other, forcing smoothness, the lower one does not enlarge or shrink. This gives you separate control on one side of the node from the other side of the node. And just for completeness, the 10th option on this menu is cancel, because quite often you'll find when you're working, this menu may come up when you didn't really intend it, so just touch on the cancel. Notice that whatever you've selected goes double black to indicate which line will be affected. Now, to summarize again, this time I'm going to present them in a little bit of a different format. When you're selecting nodes for actions, you can either click on the node or you can click on the wire itself, either one. But some actions apply to nodes and some actions apply to curve sections. Specifically, delete applies to the node. So the node is gone, but the curve stays in place. I'll undo that and put the node back. Join applies to nodes. If I select those two by drawing a marquee box around them, I can join them. Similarly, break applies to the node. Smooth, double smooth, and cusp apply to the nodes. However, it makes more sense to select the curve itself. For instance, I'll select this curve and double-click for any of the options to line or to curve or add. For instance, if I want to add a point along this curve, I'll double-click on the curve itself and add. So just remember, you can click either on the node or on the line. It doesn't really matter. But some of the actions, some of the verbs which take place make more sense on nodes, and some make more sense on the line segments themselves. The box that comes up is movable. If it ever is hiding something, just click down in the blue area, the word Node Edit, and you can move it around. And if you really didn't mean to have it in the first place, just touch the cancel point. The final type of artistic element, the fifth type, which I haven't shown you so far, is bitmap. You usually bring in a bitmap through the import technique. You can bring in either PCX bitmaps or TIFF bitmaps. You are then presented with the file selection dialog box. Now let me tell you a little bit about this. The path window allows you to select which part of your disks and which disks the information lies in. In addition, it allows you to specify what endings to use on your files. Rarely do you need to type in here. You may type in here and override anything, but rarely do you need to touch this. This rectangle on the left-hand side shows you the potential candidate files for the action. This middle positioned box shows you the names of the directories, of the folders in which material may be stored. If you ever see an entry here with the double dots, this means the folder above the folder I am in. At the end of this list is a list of single letters with hyphens around them. These are alternate disk drives. The A would be the floppy disk drive, and the C would be another hard drive. There are conditions under which this double dot entry may not appear, so you can always go up a level by clicking on this button. The cancel button allows you to abort what you're doing. The open button, or whatever it says in here, this may say open or save or load at various times depending on what you're doing. If you click on here, you will execute whatever it is that you've asked the computer to do. And in this box is the name of the file that you want to deal with. Now I happen to know that the file that I want to bring in is under CDR files. So by double-clicking on the CDR files, the computer will go to a new section of the hard disk and give me a new list of alternatives. At this point, I can either single-click, which will copy the word into the file name box, and then touch the open button, or I can simply double-click on the word. And voila, the computer has brought in the fifth artistic type, the bitmap type. Bitmaps can be stretched and rotated and positioned with the pick tool, the same as any of the other 5 graphic elements. However, in the Node Edit, I'm just going to zoom in here so we can see it. In Node Edit, the handles allow you to crop the bitmap. Notice the bitmap is not shrinking. All I'm doing is cutting away the white space. Okay, remember this coffee cup shape here. If I move in, I cut it off. So I'm not making him larger or smaller. I'm simply cropping. Now, this is the Node Edit tool. The Pick tool allows me to actually shrink and position it. And yes, bitmaps can actually even be rotated and skewed. Because of the time involved in calculating the contents of a bitmap, we don't actually put it on the screen. So when you rotate a bitmap, it just goes gray like this. But if you decide to print this on a PostScript printer, the bitmap will come out rotated. You'll have noticed in the work I've been doing on the screen the way that I've been zooming in and zooming out. Let's go over the details of that right now. The third tool in the toolbox is the View Control, or the Zoom tool. Now when I select this tool, it is only temporary. In other words, after I perform the function, the toolbox goes back to whatever it was doing. It doesn't lock on this. Now let's look at the options. The first option is the Zoom In. When you release your mouse button on the Zoom In tool, the one with the plus sign in it, you're given a new cursor. It's got the magnifying glass with the plus sign. You can then simply put your mouse down in one corner, drag to another corner, and tell the computer the rectangle that you want to see. And when you release your mouse, the computer will zoom in around that rectangle. If I, for instance, just wanted to look at the E, I could do that again. The computer will always show you what you've selected in that rectangle. You can draw it from any direction. Right beside it is the minus magnifying glass, which takes you back to the view you had immediately previous to this one. If I use it again, I go back to the previous view. It remembers the stack, the sequence of zooms that you had used. The one-to-one selection forces the computer to give you a version of the artwork that is as close as possible to one-to-one. In other words, if this is an inch high on the computer screen, it should come out fairly close to an inch high on the paper when it's printed. The Zoom All tool shows you all the artwork you've worked on. Even if I was working in one corner of the screen, it would zoom in and show me everything I had been working on. And the Zoom Page gives me an idea of where, shows me the total page, and gives me an idea of where things lie on the page. Now that we've assembled graphic elements on the page, let's put some color on these elements. Every graphic element has not only a shape and a position on the page, but 3 other aspects to it: the interior color, the exterior color, and the exterior shape. The screens that we've been working on so far are what we call the wire screens. Let me show you what this artwork would look like printed on paper. an awful yellow color. I'll just change all of that to black with a yellow outline. Let me go in and have a look at the word text. Right now, that is filled with black and outlined in yellow. The two tools in the lower left-hand corner of the toolbox give you control over the outline and the fill of these graphic elements. For instance, the second last tool controls the outline. As soon as you touch it, this flyout appears with quite a few selections available. The upper row controls the width and the shape of the pen with which the object is outlined. There's this menu choice gives you complete control over the pen width, and I'll show you this in a minute. There is none, which means no outline, hair, which means the thinnest possible outline, and then 5 presets. For instance, here it is in a thick yellow. The lower set of selections give you control over the color with which the object is outlined. The first selection opens up a complete color menu, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the other seven, right, are presets. For instance, here's a gray that's used to outline the object. The bottom tool in the toolbox controls the interior of the object. And again, I can select none, or white or black, or any of 5 presets, and some special effects. It's important to bear in mind that both the outline can be set to none and the fill can be set to none. If you do this, of course, the object does not print. It has no interior and no exterior. Remember this, though, because quite often you'll want just the outline, or just the fill. Now let's talk about the fill for a few minutes here. I'll go in and get close on the first few letters. Now I'm filling with black. Touching the fill menu gives me the choice of none, white, 5 grays, and some special effects. The first selection is the full color selection. When you release your mouse button on this selection, you're presented with a dialog box. Sorry. There we go, dialog box, which gives you complete control over the color that is used to fill the object. We have 2 color models: spot color, which is Pantone specified colors, and process color. The spot color model allows you to select any color from the Pantone color selection chart. The Pantone colors start at color 0 and work up into the around the low 40s. These colors are non-standard Pantone colors. The Pantone colors from 100 up to about 5500 are the standard Pantone colors which can be found on any Pantone color chart. For instance, here's 555. Any of these colors can be tinted with white, in other words, diluted. And as you run the tint down, they get paler and paler towards white. 100% means the pure Pantone color. At print time, the computer will if the printer is capable of reproducing Pantone, it will use that color. If there are color separations, it will separate for that Pantone. If they're not, the computer will make an approximation to the Pantone color. Bear in mind that neither Pantone nor Corel guarantees the results of a computer-simulated Pantone color. The process model allows you to specify the color of anything in terms of cyan, magenta, and yellow. To use this model, simply run the colors up or down using either the arrows or by typing numbers in. And you can run through 1 million different colors in 1% steps. Now, because this model may be unfamiliar to some of you, I'd like to just give you a few quickies on this color model. Cyan is a color that is a mixture of blue and green. Magenta is an off purple. Yellow is yellow. Black is present as well, because if you want something that has black in it, you probably don't want a mixture of three colors. It tends to get a little muddy. You probably want a pure black ink. If you're searching for the other colors in the rainbow, you can get red by specifying 100%. Red is 100% magenta and 100% yellow. Blue is 100% cyan and 100% magenta. And green is 100% yellow and 100% cyan. If you're looking for any other colors, pink is usually about 20% magenta. And most of the browns are up around 100% yellow, 20% cyan, and 60% magenta. That's a good starting place for most browns. If you do ever run all three of those numbers up to 100%, then you will get black. And in most cases, it's better to use the black entry if you do want black. And remember that the absence of all ink is assumed to be white. In other words, the computer is assuming that you're printing on white paper. If you're printing on transparencies, it's assuming that you're going to use a white light. In addition to just specifying the color, in this menu you also have control over the PostScript special effects. If you are using a PostScript printer, you may manually select the screen pattern which you use to fill in the color. You can use a standard default screen, and on PostScript printers that's almost always a circle. Corel also provides several other colors. There's a dot, line, line 1, 2, dot 2, out circle black, out circle white, diamond, microwaves, grid, lines, and star. These options can be found in the user proc.txt, and you can change these by referring to the manual. These screens can be applied with any frequency and at any angle. I recommend that you avoid playing with these numbers until you're really familiar with how the program works and the capabilities of your PostScript printer. If you don't have PostScript, don't even bother with this menu. It's not applicable to any other printers other than PostScript. So, back to work. If I ask for red, which is 100% magenta and 100% yellow, and click on OK, the object is filled with red. Again, that is the first selection from the fill flyout. The second option is none, which only gives me the outline. The objects remain hollow. The next 7 selections are quick selections for white, black, and various shades of gray. Because most of you have black and white printers, we've put in this high-speed selection of gray, 20, 40, 60, 80, 12, 25, 50, 60, and 80% gray. With fills, there are a couple of special effects. The second last option on the flyout is for fountains. This allows you to fill objects either in a linear fountain or a radial fountain. Let's talk about linear for a minute. Suppose I go with a blue, and I go from dark blue to, say, light blue. The angle at the top of the screen here specifies the angle in which the fountain or the graduated fill will occur. 270 degrees is the same as minus 90 and is straight down. So we're going to have dark blue at the top, light blue at the bottom. And you'll see the objects being filled that way. In addition to linear fills, we also offer radial fills, and these fill from the outside to the inside. They take a little longer to print, but they can give you some very nice effects. There's the T done, and the E is coming along. Now, the entire object is filled in a circle. Not visible on the screen is the second half of the X and the rest of the T. These would be colored. Well, let me show you. There we go. The fill is always a circular pattern, even if the object is long and thin. So you can see the last part of the right-hand T is the same, roughly the same color as the first part of the left-hand T. Some of you may have EGA screens. One of the problems with EGA screens is that they're often installed improperly, or the drivers which is used with them is out of date. And we do have a bit of a problem with that. If, while you are painting fountains, either linear or radial fountains, if you use a color other than cyan or black, in other words, if you use magenta or yellow, your computer may lock up. If that is the case, please refer to the manual. There is an action which you can perform which will disable fountains from appearing on your screen until you can have your software updated. So remember, the symptoms are your computer locking up while previewing the fountain involving magenta or yellow. Cyan and black always work, and most of us who have the screens installed properly, all the colors work. Another thing to watch out for is when you're using printers, like for instance the inkjet printer, which is available from Hewlett-Packard. If you are running a fountain, say from cyan to magenta and yellow, which is the equivalent of red, then as the object is painted, notice it's cyan at the top and red at the bottom. But there is an area in the middle here where we have a little bit of cyan and a little bit of red. Going back to the menu, there is an area where we have, say, 50% magenta, cyan, 50% magenta, and 50% yellow, in between these two. One of the things about the inkjet is it says to itself when it's printing, if I ever have cyan, magenta, and yellow all at the same time, I'm going to substitute black. So what you'll find in that case is that as your fountain colors are previewed, you end up with muddy black stripes in the middle. So just a word of warning, if you're using the inkjet from Hewlett-Packard, try and stay with only 2 of the colors involved on one side or the other. For instance, if I had said 99% cyan to 99% magenta, without involving any yellow, I'll get a much cleaner, colorful output. The final fill which can be used is the PostScript special effects, and as before, these only apply to those of you who have PostScript printers. When you select this option, a list of some 35 named special effects are available, and as you select these special effects, some numbers change underneath here. These numbers are parameters which you can apply to these special effects to change them. Please refer to Appendix A in the manual for examples of these special effects. Notice how also that when I select these special effects for use on the screen, I just get a gray sort of fill because the screen can't possibly demonstrate all the power of PostScript. And just one more thing about fills. Fills only apply to objects which have at least one closed path. Notice the freehand art, which is down here, is not filled. If I select it and try and fill it, it has no effect because it has no closed paths. However, these graphic elements, rectangles and ellipses, are closed. They go back, wind around, and come back and touch themselves, so they can be colored and filled. In addition to the interior of any object, we also have control over the perimeter of the object and how it is painted. Let's have a look at this ellipse. I've specified that the center of the ellipse be filled with gray and that the contour, the outline, be painted in a moderately thick yellow. Both of those controls are available on this flyout. The first line controls the thickness. For instance, this is the thickest line that we can quick select, and here is the thinnest line we can quick select. It's probably not visible on the video. If I make it black, then it should be. Yes, there it is. I can also say none, in which case the object is only filled and there's no stroke on the outside. The first selection gives me complete control over the width and shape of the pen that is used to paint the object. I can say no pen, or a regular pen, or I can say dashed or dotted lines. Now, dashed and dotted lines only apply to those of you with PostScript printers. I can ask for the pen to be stroked behind the fill or in front of the fill, and I'll show you the effect of this in a moment. Normally, the width of the line is specified directly by modifying this width parameter. And let me show you what say a 0.2 inch line looks like. I can control the thickness of that by going in and running it up to, say, 0.3. And you'll see it's a little bit thicker. In addition to just the raw thickness, I also have control over the calligraphy. And by running the stretch factor down below 100%, I'm telling the computer that at its thickest, I want the width of the line to be 0.3 inches. And at its thinnest, I want it to be 46% less than that. And voila. Thick, thin. That's 46% as thick as that. Now, often, to give the impression of human calligraphy, you don't want your thick and thin business straight up and down. You probably want to bend it a bit. And the angle allows you to tilt that. This little picture here is supposed to be diagrammatic of the shape of a nib which you are using to paint the object. Now notice now the thinnest part is here, the thickest part is here. Again, 46% times the thickest. You don't have to deal with numbers below 100%. You can go above 100%, like this, and now the thickest part will be 200% times the thinnest part, which is 0.3 inches. So the thinnest part will be 0.3 inches, and the thickest part will be 0.6 inches. Often when you're dealing with these fat outlines, they eat in on the shape of your artwork. You can control this effect by putting the pen behind the fill. So in other words, the pen goes first, and then the fill is overstamped over top of it. This is a great way to keep your text intact. Remember, though, that you lose half of your line width. This is going to be only 0.15 inches here, and this will be 0.3 inches here. In the pen control box, you also have control over the pointiness of the corners. Now, ellipses don't really have very good corners, don't have any corners at all. So let me show you a rectangle. And I'll put pointy corners on it, and a fairly thick line, and back to yellow. And you'll see how the corners here are quite sharp. Let me just change those to gray so that you can see them. There we go. With the pen control box, you can change those corners to rounded or beveled. And if you have any dangling nodes, unconnected points, you can either make them rounded, butt-ended, or you can even put arrowheads on them. If you're concerned about the calligraphy, and this can sometimes happen, and you want to get back to normal, just touch the reset button. That'll turn you back into a round pen. The scale with image option is used. Notice the bevel now on the corners. The scale with image option is used if I shrink this rectangle. Now the width of the rectangle, the width of the outline, sorry, gets smaller with the rectangle itself. See, as this rectangle is half the size it used to be, so is the outline. Without this option, let me go back to the size it was. Turn that option off. And as I shrink the rectangle, notice that the line thickness stays thick. Typically I work, when I'm working on a project, I will work with that scale option business off at the beginning of the project. In other words, I will want to have complete control over the line width that everything is painted with while I'm preparing the artwork. When the artwork is finished, however, I will turn on that scale with pen option so that if someone takes my artwork and shrinks it, all of the lines shrink down in concert. For instance, if it's a corporate logo, I want all of the line thicknesses to change with it. Now, exterior color is controlled along this bottom line. We have 5 preset grays, black, white. If you want none, it's up here. And complete color control. And again, the color models that are involved are exactly the same color models that we had before. There's a dark Pantone green. You do not get PostScript special effects available for your outlines, but you do have PostScript screening available here. If you have bitmaps on your screen, the fill color, selected here, is used to fill the background of your bitmap, and the stroke color, here, is used to fill the black areas of your bitmap. So far, everything we've created piles up on the screen. The thing that we created first is at the back, and the things that we've created more recently are stacked on top of it and appear closer to the viewer. With the Arrange tools, you have complete control over changing that. Arranging gives you control over the order in which objects are printed. For instance, if I have a word on the screen and a few rectangles, it appears on the wire screen as if the rectangles are simply going around the text. But in fact, since the rectangles are painted and they were drawn more recently, they go over top of the text. Arrange gives you control over this. For instance, if I select the rectangle which is at the front, apparently closer to us, Arrange to back puts it behind. Now there's another rectangle in the way, the squat one. I can put it at the back as well. Then the word text is brought to the front by default, because the others are pushed to the back. I could have shortened that procedure by simply selecting the word text and bringing it to the front. Other things you can do with Arrange are, for instance, grouping. I'm going to select the tall rectangle and the text and group. Grouping is used when you wish to lock objects together. Notice that when I shrink them, and when I move them, or even if I select it and move it, they stay stuck together. The two are considered now an entity by the program. Anything I do to one affects the other. Notice that the objects have their own separate color and stroke and position. The complement of this is, of course, ungroup, which unties them. And now, if I move one, it moves independently. There is another trick we can pull called combine. Now, combine merges two objects together. They lose their separate identities, and they lose their separate colors. When I combine these two, sorry, let me just undo that. First I'm going to put the word text in the inside, and then I'm going to combine. They become a single element. Text no longer exists. It is part of this rather odd-shaped rectangle with holes in the middle of it. If, for contrast, I change this rectangle to gray, watch as I pass this new object over top of the gray. It is a rectangle with holes in it. So what the combine tool option does, is it takes several objects and groups them together into a single artistic element with a single color and a single outline. You may feel that you're losing control because you only can have one color, but actually what you're gaining is the ability to put holes in objects. The complement of this is break apart. Break apart takes the artistic elements and separates them based upon closed subpaths. See, the T is now separated from the X, is separated from the E. And these are 5 different, distinct artistic elements now. The T is a separate thing which can be rotated and magnified and skewed. If I bring the T inside here, select the rectangle and the T, and ask for a combine, then you'll see it's now a new artistic element. Convert to curves is another artistic control. If you have a line of text, let's just zoom in on that. Here we have the word text. It is stored as a string. At this point, because it is text, I can go in and kern, change the font size, or the point size, or even change the spelling of the word. But if I wish, I can go arrange, convert to curves. This is a rather dramatic step, and it changes the text to art. It's a one-way street. I can't go back now. I can't change the spelling of the letter of the word. I can't change an E to an O. But the good news is that I can distort it. Because it's artwork, it's treated just like any other artwork. And any of the things which I could have done to the freehand tool, with the freehand tool, I can do to the text. Returning back now to the screen, let's start again, and I'll show you some more things that you can do with text. I'll drop another word down here. And we'll zoom in on that. Align to baseline allows you to correct any misalignments which you may have done during kerning, during node edit, for instance. If I bring the S up and I change the T by giving it a bit of a bend, then align to baseline brings everything down to the baseline, and straighten text removes any of the corrupting effects which may have placed on the text. Another thing you can do with text is bind it to a path. Now this applies to any path. I've drawn a freehand, but there's no reason why you couldn't use an ellipse or a rectangle down here, or even another piece of text. Using the pick tool, select both a piece of text and a piece of art, and then say arrange fit text to path. And the computer will make the text walk along the path. If this was a circle, well, I can show you. Undo. If I change this to a circle, for this example, remember to draw your circle starting in the lower right-hand corner, going to the upper left-hand corner. If you want more information about this, please see the manual. And then I'll say, edit text. Let's see now. Here we go. I'm going to make the text centered so that it'll come out properly. And link it with the ellipse, and then say fit text to the path. You see the text comes out on the top of the ellipse. The final option which you can do with arrange is align several items. For instance, if I have all of these, I can tell the computer that I want to align them all centered, center aligned, left, as far as left and right, as far as horizontal motion is concerned, centered, and bottom aligned. So you see that they're all aligned on the bottom and they're all centered. As you can imagine, this has lots of uses for lining things up on your page. Now it's great fun to use CorelDRAW to compose all sorts of things and twist them and color them to your heart's content. Let's take what we've done and save it in the computer's memory and run some check prints. Now, besides dealing with the artwork itself, we have to tell the computer where the artwork is, and how to save artwork, and how to get new artwork in. These options are available under the File pull-down. The first selection is New. If you ever have a page full of junk that you want to get rid of, just use the New option. Open allows you to select an existing piece of artwork which you have on your disk. When CorelDRAW is installed, you probably will put the samples on your computer, and the samples are available. One of them is the pool table. If you wish to save this now, you can simply use the Save option. If you wish to give it a new name, though, remember to use the Save As option. This opens up a dialog box. As I mentioned before, this is the path that the computer uses to save your files under. This is where the file name goes. Here's a list of potential candidate names, and here's a list of folders within the computer's disk Also, there's a list of alternate disks in case you have more than one disk available. In addition to saving and recalling files, we have the ability to bring in auxiliary files, either bitmaps or artwork which is generated on other computer programs. And we have the ability to export to the computer's disk formats which are usable by other programs. PostScript EPS is probably the most often recommended format for exporting. It's only really applicable, though, if you have a PostScript printer. CorelDRAW EPS files are saved including an image header, so that programs like Ventura and PageMaker can give you a visual representation of the artwork. You have control over the size of the header. You can make it coarse, which means it will load quickly, or you can make it fine, in which case you'll have more detail on your screen, but it will take longer for Ventura or PageMaker to bring it up. By the way, these EPS files also work quite well in WordPerfect, Word, and AMI. Windows Metafiles is an alternate form, not highly recommended. Because of the detail that we put into our artistic elements, usually these metafiles become so large that they become a bit cumbersome. If you have a PostScript printer, you may prefer to deal with TIFF export. And CorelDRAW will save the artwork in a bitmap format. And again, you have control over the coarseness or the fineness of the bitmap that is used. Instead of printing through another program, you can print directly from CorelDRAW, either for test prints or for producing simple pages, using the Print menu. At this point, you're given quite a few selections. Some of these are only available if you have PostScript printers. You can have crop marks included. You can force the computer to make multiple pages to represent your artwork. You can force color separations to come out, and you can even make the artwork come out negative in case you're making films. You can force the computer to print the file if you need to do so, and you can force the computer to make the artwork artificially larger or smaller than you had designed it. If you wish to change any of the printer parameters, click on this button and you'll get a standard Windows setup menu which allows you to change things like portrait and landscape and that sort of thing. For CorelDRAW itself, dealing with the page, you have control over the page here. You can make it portrait or landscape, and you can change between letter legal or several of the European page sizes. Or you can ask for a custom page. Now you will have noticed these units boxes in some of the dialog boxes with the drop shadow. If you click on any of those, you can change between 4, or in this case 3 different units. You can change between inches, centimeters, picas, and points. Notice that the numbers in the box change to match. 11 inches is roughly 28 centimeters. And of course here is where you shut down CorelDRAW. Most of the edits that you need to do in terms of placing things on the page can be done using the Pick tool, which we've already covered. In addition to that, we also provide you with a few more exotic tools available under the Edit pull-down. The Edit pull-down gives you quite a bit of control over the actions that you've performed. For instance, if I pick up this artwork and move it up, we have, as the first option, an Undo option, which basically undoes the last thing I did. If I moved it or magnified it or rotated it, rotating a circle is a bad example. If I magnified it, undo brings it back to where it was. After each undo, you have the option to redo, just so you can switch back and forth between the two versions. Remember, though, that undo only applies to the last thing that you did. For instance, if I move this up here and then moved it down, I only have one undo. The repeat key allows you to perform the last action on something else. For instance, if I took this and stretched it a little bit, then the repeat key allows me to repeat that action on any other object. For instance, see this object here. Repeat allows it to be moved again. This is applicable for instance, if I have a rectangle, if I magnify it, the repeat key allows me to continue magnifying it. Also under the edit pull-down is clear, which is the same as the delete key. That can be undone. The duplicate key allows me to make a second copy of anything. For instance, here is an object, duplicate, makes another one. See, there was one behind it. Copy style from is very useful when you're dealing with colors. For instance, if I made this a rectangle filled with, let's say, purple, magenta. Now I will select the other two rectangles. The copy style from allows me to copy either the outline shape, the outline color, or the fill color, or the text attributes of whatever I point at. Now notice that my cursor is a new shape. That actually says from with a question mark. I then click on the object that I want to copy from, and the colors and the shapes and the pen thicknesses will be brought forward to the other elements. Also under the edit pull-down is the edit text choice, which allows you to go in and change the spelling or the font of any text, and the select all. CorelDRAW can work with rulers and grids. These are available under the display pull-down. Show rulers simply uses the top line and the left-hand line to give you a ruler based on the units that the grid is working with. The size of the grid is available as the second pull-down grid size under the display options. We have a very simple dialog box which says the number of units per units. For instance, what you're looking at here is 2 per inch. In other words, half-inch steps. I could just as well have 2 per centimeter, or 10 per centimeter. In this case, we would have a millimeter grid. Let's go back to, say, 4 per inch. So I have a 1/4 inch grid now at this point. And with the grid on, this forces most of CorelDRAW's activities to lie on the grid. For instance, if I pick up our 3 rectangles and move them, notice how that the movement box steps in 1/4 inch steps. And notice how it lines up with the rulers. Also, notice how the ruler marker up here moves with the cursor. It moves in steps of 1/4 inch. With the grids turned off, the ruler marker moves smoothly. Notice there's both a horizontal marker and a vertical marker. Turning the grid back on, the motion locks to the grid. Now this is great when you're creating, for instance, rectangles. Here's a rectangle. Notice how that when the rectangle is being created, it jumps in steps. So it's very easy, if you're doing an org chart, to end up with rectangles that are exactly the same shape. Just drag them out until they look, if your grid is coarse enough, till they look roughly the same to the eye. This is obviously different. It's not hard to make an exact copy. So if you're doing anything that involves geometric shapes and rectangles, I strongly recommend that you work with the grids on, at least while you're creating the artwork. Bear in mind, because of the way CorelDRAW has been created, you should work with the grids on as much as possible. If you ever have artwork that was created, even with the grid on, and you modify it and take it off grid, you'll find it very difficult to get it back on the grid. So try and work with the grid. If you intend to use the grid, try and keep it on as much as possible. Rulers use the same units as the grid markers. In other words, these are inch-based rulers because the grid was specified in terms of inches. Notice now that when I zoom, the rulers expand to show the zoomed effect. There's a 1 inch in this zoom, and when I zoom out, there's 1 inch. As you've noticed, CorelDRAW work is done mostly in the wire screen, or the skeleton screen. Call it what you wish. In addition to this screen, you've seen me use the preview screen, where the objects are shown with their color and with the thicknesses of the lines. Let me show you some more about that preview screen. Most CorelDRAW activity takes place on this wire screen, or a skeleton screen, where you see the frame upon which all the artwork is hung. If you wish to see the color and shape with which the artwork will be printed, simply select Display, Show Preview. And this will bring up the preview window. You don't actually perform any work in this window. If you pick up an object, it doesn't do you any good in this window. You do all of your manipulations in the wire window, and you watch the results in the preview window. There are some options, though, in the preview window. For instance, the preview window can have its own toolbox with its own zoom, independent zoom. Let's go in and have a look at that. You can also notice that the two windows are side by side, left to right. You can also force them to be one above the other using these two controls. If it does not have its own toolbox, then it always tries to use the same zoom as the working window. By grabbing the separation barrier, you can make one larger than the other. At this point, auto update is on. What that does is every time I move an object or make any changes whatsoever to an object on the wire screen, on the total document, the preview window is updated to match. For instance, if I pick this up and bring it to the front, the preview window is updated to match. If that takes too much time and is annoying, you can turn the auto update off. See, the check mark is missing. In which case, movements here do not refresh the screen. You must refresh the preview screen by tapping it with the mouse. And finally, if your computer is very slow, you can preview selected only, which will only show you what's been selected. Let me turn the auto update on, and I'll select those things, and there they are. So it only shows the things that are selected. If the artwork is taking a long time to print, bear in mind it is interruptible. For instance, if I take and move that rectangle and that rectangle, I can go ahead and make further modifications to the artwork, even though the preview screen is a little bit slow and not catching up with me. Eventually, as soon as I finish all my accumulated work, the preview screen will catch up with me and paint the total artwork. One of the most exciting aspects of CorelDRAW, which I haven't mentioned so far, is its ability to auto-trace. You can bring in artwork from either paper or from other software packages and have CorelDRAW trace around it and turn it into artwork. Let's have a look at how that works. Auto-trace can be performed on any bitmap which can be scanned into CorelDRAW or brought into CorelDRAW. The best kind of original to start with when you're doing an auto-trace is something that's high contrast and something like a silhouette. For instance, let me import something that a friend of mine did on the back of an envelope. Just a little picture of a little man. And I'll zoom in on that so we'll get a good shot of him. With the bitmap selected, notice I'm in Pick Tool and the bitmap is the thing that is selected. I'll simply select the Draw tool, and the program is smart enough to know that I'm just going from a bitmap to drawing, so I want to auto-trace. Click the mouse to the left-hand side of any of the black parts of the bitmap, and the computer will find the edge of the bitmap and go around it. Can you see those little dots and black lines going around? Again, I'll do another one for his mustache and his face. And I'll do a third on the inside of his hat. And we end up with 3 black lines going around the bitmap. Now, back to the Pick tool. I'll select the bitmap itself and throw it away. And you'll see the computer is left with the 3 lines which it analyzed from the original artwork. The next step, which we usually perform at this point, is to node edit these, because quite often the computer will generate too many nodes. Simply select some and delete them. And using the Bezier controls, you can restore the little man's hat. And you can get rid of some of the bumpiness that was caused. For instance, if I want to straighten out his chin a bit, I'll select several nodes. And if I want to straighten out the bottom of the bust section, just select a few nodes and delete. Straighten out his hat a bit, and we're done. Now, in terms of coloring this, there's two ways to color this artwork. Let me show you one way. I've got them illustrated here at the bottom of the page. You can leave the little man in one plane, in which case, but using the combine tool, you can bring him into one plane, and all the areas that are inside his face are left transparent. An alternate way is to take the various aspects that compose the little man and make them alternatively black, white, white. A discussion of this, a very good discussion of this, is presented in the manual. In order to customize the environment in which you are working, we've given you some control over the preferences that the program uses. Under Special, the last selection is Preferences. The first 5 options have to do with the creation of freehand art. When you take your mouse and start drawing, the computer will try and match your art, your freehand drawing, with Bézier's. And it will come within this many pixels, this many screen dots of what you've originally drawn. The number here ranges between 1 and 10. 10 means, give me the smoothest curve possible that runs fairly close to my original art, but go for smoothness. The number 1 means reproduce my original artwork as close as possible, even if it means lots of bumps and lumps and lots of Béziers. I usually work with a 5. It's a good compromise. When we're doing auto trace, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes, we have a separate number, because quite often you want your auto trace to work differently. Again, remember, a 10 means give me smooth, minimum number of Béziers, and allow a little slop from the original. A number 1 means be as true to the original as possible, even if it means bumps and lumps. The corner threshold, again, is a number which runs between 1 and 4. And this is how the computer decides where corners and cusps should be. The straight line threshold is how the computer tells the difference between a Bézier and a straight line. And if you make this number 10, it will be fairly relaxed, and it will assume that you want as many straight lines as possible, even if it means corrupting the original a little bit. Auto join is how far apart objects should be before they automatically stick to each other. Now that I've shown you them here, let me just run over them again in the freehand tool. If I draw this sort of stroke, the computer will try and reproduce this with Béziers as closely as possible. A number 1 would mean stick to it, and a number 10 would mean give me the minimum number of nodes. The straight line threshold would have looked at, for instance, a long run like this and decided whether it was a straight line or a Bézier. The auto join determines that if I'm this many dots away from the previous element, I should automatically link to it, which it did in that case. But if I'm this many dots away, I won't link to it. Also under Preferences, we give you the ability to control the miter limit. For more information on this, you can refer to the manual, please. When we are painting fountain colors, or fountain effects, graduated fills, we give you control here over the number of stripes, number of bands with which the object is painted. For special effects, you can crank this down to as low as 1, 2, or 3. Typically, when you're working on a screen or with a laserjet printer, you'd probably want to use numbers between 20 and 30. When you go for your final artwork, you may want to run this number up to 99, bearing in mind that it's going to take a little bit longer, although you will get much better results. When you tell the program that you wish to make a duplicate of an object, this is where the duplicate shall be. I like to work with my duplicates showing up immediately beneath where they were in the first place. But if we make this number 0.1 inches, then when I ask for the duplicate of something, it will show up 0.1 inches to the right and 0.1 inches up from where the original was. Notice now that there are two squirrely lines there. If I ask for another duplicate, it will be offset again. It's handy to be able to change these numbers for drop shadows, for instance. The last selection under Preferences gives you control over the letter which is used when you're selecting text. I just changed that to an S so that when I go and lay some text down, the character which shows in the selection box is the S. This is great when you're creating logos. If there's a specific letter which you're looking for, you can just run through the fonts, looking at all the different S's. That little message there, text string not empty, that was just reminding me that I hadn't typed any words into the text box. When we were designing CorelDRAW and the way that people use it, we tried to make it as easy and intuitive as possible. You'll have learned that many of the actions which you perform are done using the mouse. But in some cases, we allow you more control over what you're doing or subtly change the way you're doing things by using keys on the keyboard at the same time as you're using the mouse. Let me show you some of those right now. I'll start on the left and work to the right. The F3 key, which is either on the left or across the top, allows you to wake up the preview window and see what your artwork will look like when it's colored. The F6 key is a quick way to turn the grids on and off. The next group of keys that we use are the Tab key and the Control key just underneath it. The Tab key only works in the pick mode. This allows you to select any object on the screen in the order that they will be printed. You can use Tab to go down through the printed list, go deeper and deeper into the artwork, or you can use Shift-Tab to come up. If you ever have two objects, one exactly over top of the other, you can distinguish between them this way. The Control key, which is either placed underneath the Tab key or on the bottom row in the newer keyboards, is heavily used in CorelDRAW. We took the word control and used it in the sense of constrain or restraint. And as you will have learned in many of the tools, it is used to limit or lock the range of abilities that you have with your mouse. The Shift key, as you'll remember, is used to select multiple objects. On the main text keyboard, we use Control-O. Push the Control key and the O at the same time, and that will quickly allow you to open any piece of artwork. Similarly, Control-S will save the current artwork using the same name. Remember that if you want your artwork not to replace what you have already, you should use the File pull-down, Save As, and give it a new name. The Control-P key allows you to wake up the Print menu. And if you just want a quick print of something, it's the quickest way to get that done. Don't forget the spacebar. No matter what tool you're in, you can quickly go to the pick mode by simply tapping the spacebar and return to what you were doing by tapping the spacebar again. Over on the right-hand side of the keyboard, the only key that we use is the plus key. Now, it's not the plus key that's above the equal sign. It's the plus key on the right-hand side of the keyboard. When you're moving anything, if you tap the plus key, you will leave behind a copy of the original, effectively making a duplicate. We've now covered all of the basics of CorelDRAW. I'd like to go on a little bit further and show you some of the rather dramatic effects you can get by combining some of the things that I've shown you. Here are some examples of some special effects you can get by combining the tools of which I've which I've been talking about. For instance, here we have a word, single artistic element on the screen. Get in a little bit closer. Now what I'm going to do is try and make a ribbon effect around the outside of this object. First, I'm going to make a duplicate. And using preferences, I've asked for my duplicates to be placed exactly behind the existing object. So I'll go Edit, Duplicate. Now there are two copies of the word Corel on the screen. One of them I will give a thick black outline and no fill. Using the Tab key, I will select the other one, and I'll give it a moderately thick white outline and a gray fill, and bring it to the front. Now let's see what that looks like when it's filled with ink. We have a thick word, Corel, and then the thinner word. Notice that the one at the back has a thick black outline, the one at the front has a thinner white outline and a gray overfill. To be a little better artistically, we probably want to make the white line a little bit thicker. Now notice, because of the way CorelDRAW works, the white line is eating away at the object. It's stamped over top of the body of the character, and it's eroding the inside. For instance, if we look at the E, you'll see the E has been eaten away by the white. See the way it's going like that. So what we can do is, just for this one, reverse the order of the fill and the outline, putting the pen stroke behind the fill, giving a much cleaner effect for text, so that the white is painted and then the body of the character, the Helvetica black character, is stamped over top after the white outline. Now in this case, perhaps it might be better to go with straight black. Yes, I think that's the effect I was looking for. Now in this case, it's probably better to put the preview down so that we can see the whole thing all at once. And there we go, a customized logo. Just by placing two objects, one behind the other, and arranging the outlines to be various thicknesses. This effect applies not only to text, but to artwork, even road maps. If you need to do a map of a certain section of your community, you might consider using straight lines to represent the roads and making two copies of them, one behind the other, the back one being black and thick and the front one being white and thin. It gives the illusion of cartographic roads. Here's another example of some of the things you can do with CorelDRAW. I've turned the grid on, fairly coarse, half-inch steps, and I'll generate some rectangles. I'm leading up to isometric projections, so just to give you an idea of what I'm leading up to. Notice the status line. It's flickering a little bit, but I have a 3-inch by 1.5-inch rectangle. That's the face view of the rectangle. Now I'm putting in a 3-inch by 1-inch top surface and a 1.5-inch by 1-inch side surface. Now I'm going to put some markers in here. BOX. Right. We'll put that in here. Turn the grid off for a second. There's the word box. Now, one of the speed up keys, while you're moving anything, if you tap the right-hand plus key, you leave behind the original. So effectively, it's a quick way to make a duplicate. Tap the plus key again, and I've got another copy. This one I have to make a little bit smaller so that it fits into the box. As a matter of fact, it still doesn't fit, so I'm just going to spin it a bit so it does. Now I have 3 objects. The width of this object matches this one, and the height of this object matches this one, and the width of this one matches the height of this one, which is a perfect setup for isometric projections. We'll take the top object and bring it down with the grid on till it touches the lower object. We'll take the right-hand pair and move them over till they touch. Did I move or stretch? Looks like I stretched. Undo. Right, we want to move over. That's better. Now we'll take the top pair and slant them, double-click so that we get the alternate transforms, and I'm going to slant them to the right with the Control key on, and watch the status line until it says 45 degrees. Let go of the mouse, let go of the Control key. Now I'm going to select the right-hand face, click again to get the alternate transformations, and using the Constrain key again, slide it up till it's 45 degrees, and we have our isometric projection. If any of you do decide to use this, remember that the stroke that you use to paint the outside of the box, here I'll go with the thick stroke, you should use the, I'll zoom in a bit and you'll see the artifact I'm talking about. I'll go in there on the point of the box. Try to use rounded corners. If you use mitered or beveled corners in this area where the sides of the box meet, you may have a few artifacts left over because of the way miter joints work. So if possible, if you're doing this kind of projection, work with rounded corners or thin lines. You'll get much better effects. Well, that's it. You now know all of the basic elements of CorelDRAW. With these elements, you can build extremely complex pieces of artwork. Use your imagination. If any of the aspects of this tutorial left you a bit wondering, if you didn't follow any of my presentations, please refer to the reference manual that's included with the software package. It progresses in roughly the same way as the videotape, but things are explained in slightly different verbiage. And I hope between this manual and the video tutorial, you should be able to use the package to its full extent. Thank you very much for purchasing CorelDRAW.
CorelDRAW, the ideal illustration program for novices or professionals.